Have you ever noticed how being a good person sometimes feels like a curse? You tell the truth, and they call you naive. You help others, and they question your intentions. You speak with sincerity, and suddenly, you're the problem. This isn't paranoia, it's a pattern. In a world that rewards manipulation and masks, real goodness feels like rebellion. Brown calls vulnerability our most accurate measure of courage. But in most workplaces, social circles, and even families, courage is mistaken for foolishness. You're told to tone it down, be more strategic, stop caring so much. Why does honesty trigger suspicion? Why does kindness make people uncomfortable? Why does integrity cost so much, while deceit seems to win the game? Not to elevate the good, but to domesticate the strong. Nietzsche saw it coming over a century ago. He warned of a society that would twist morality into a weapon. And maybe that's what Juve felt deep down, but couldn't he put into words. That being good, truly good, in this world, is like swimming upstream, and why the world feels rigged against people who refuse to lie, cheat, or betray. So today, let's look deeper. Let's uncover how morality became a performance, how virtue got hijacked by resentment. But most of all, let's discover a different kind of strength, a new path to goodness, not the sick, self-erasing goodness the world praises, but a bold, creative, intelligent goodness that refuses to die. Friedrich Nietzsche called it herd morality, a world where society doesn't just teach you what's right and wrong, it punishes you for thinking differently. In this system, humility isn't about being grounded, it's about staying small. Silence is called wisdom, but it's often just fear in disguise. Compliance is called virtue, but it's usually the death of personal truth. Greene warns us, many people who preach morality are really hiding resentment. They pretend to defend values, but, in truth, they're protecting their ego. Herd morality isn't about justice, it's about control. It tells you to keep your head down, not because it's wise, but because if you stand up, others feel exposed. They whisper behind your back, "Who does she think she is? He's too ambitious." That kind of honesty will get him in trouble. And they're right, not because your values are flawed, but because your presence unsettles their comfort. Herd morality doesn't want real goodness, it wants obedience. And it has a clever disguise. It teaches you that wanting more is selfish, that standing out is arrogance, that success must come with shame. The courage to be disliked says this plainly. You are not living to satisfy the expectations of others. But herd morality doesn't want you to know that, because the moment you stop seeking approval, the moment you stop apologizing for your light, you become dangerous. Not because you hurt people, but because you remind them they don't have to stay stuck. And nothing threatens the herd more than someone who dares to walk their own path. You know, the pattern. Someone in your life always has a crisis. They blame others, take no responsibility. And yet, somehow, you're always the one expected to fix it. When you help, they barely say thank you. When you don't, they act like you've committed a betrayal. This isn't love, it's emotional blackmail. And yet, you keep helping, not because it brings peace, but because saying no makes you feel guilty. Because deep down, you were taught, good people always say yes. Nedra Glover Tawwab calls this codependent kindness, the kind of kindness that erases your own needs, just to earn a temporary sense of peace. But peace bought with self-abandonment is just a delayed war. And what's worse, the more you give, the more people expect. The more responsible you are, the less grace you receive. You become the strong one, not out of strength, but because everyone else opted out. And slowly, without noticing, your goodness becomes a contract. Always show up, never complain. Sacrifice first, rest lasts. But here's the truth, and it may be hard to hear. Helping without boundaries isn't noble. It's unsustainable. Bessel van der Kolk writes in The Body Keeps a Score that when we ignore our own emotional needs, even in the name of love, we store trauma in the body. That unexplained fatigue, the burnout, the silent resentments, not just exhaustion. It's the cost of a kindness that forgot to include yourself. Real goodness doesn't mean rescuing everyone. It means knowing where you end and someone else begins. It means saying, I will help, but not at the cost of my dignity. I care, but I am not your emotional crutch. I am kind, but I am not weak. Because the truth is, no one wins when you disappear to make others feel whole. And the moment you stop apologizing for choosing yourself, that's when your goodness finally becomes powerful. Integrity sounds like a virtue everyone admires, until you actually live it, until you speak up when silence is expected, until you stay honest when a little lie would keep the peace, until you walk away from comfort, just to stay clean with your own soul. That's when it hits you. People don't fear dishonesty, they fear integrity. Because when you refuse to play the game, you expose the game. Brown puts it like this: integrity is choosing courage over comfort, choosing what is right over what is fun, fast, or easy. And in a world addicted to image, convenience, and shortcuts, that kind of courage, it's offensive. Mark Manson says, the reason people get upset with you for setting boundaries or speaking truth isn't because you wrong. It's because you force them to confront the part of themselves they've ignored. You become a mirror, and not everyone is ready to see what they've become. You'll hear it in their whispers. She's difficult. He's too intense. Why does she take everything so seriously? But what they really mean is, her presence makes me uncomfortable with my own compromise. Adam Grant explains that in most workplaces, givers, those who genuinely help, often suffer unless they protect themselves from takers and fakers. Without healthy boundaries, generosity becomes a weapon used against you. And soon, your integrity isn't seen as strength, it's treated like a liability. You're too honest to be trusted, too kind to be strategic, too good to understand how the real world works. But let's be clear, that says nothing about you, and everything about the system you're standing inside. The system isn't designed for truth, it's designed for compliance. And every time you speak with clarity, act with conscience, or refuse to play along, you remind people that they've accepted less than they once dreamed. And that reminder, it's powerful, it's disruptive, and that SYDLL try to silence it. Not because it's wrong, but because it's real. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that to be good, we must suffer, that a worthy life is one drenched in exhaustion, filled with sacrifice, and starved of joy, that if you're not burned out, you're not doing enough, that happiness is selfish, that rest is weakness. And so we created a culture that doesn't celebrate health. It worships martyrdom. You know, the type always tired, always sacrificing, always doing more than they should. And society applauds. What a saint. What a warrior. But look closer, look into their eyes. Are they fulfilled? Or are they hollowed out, living on borrowed energy and buried resentment? Gabor, in The Myth of Normal, explains that chronic self-sacrifice, especially among caregivers, often masks unresolved trauma. When people suppress their needs long enough, he says, they forget they even had them. Bessel van der Kolk confirms it. Trauma is not just what happened to you. It is also what you had to suppress to survive. And when you grow up believing that your needs are a burden, your joy becomes guilt. You learn to wear suffering like a badge. You learn to apologize when you're happy. You even learn to sabotage yourself when things are going too well, because you've internalized the idea that life must hurt to have value. This is the cult of martyrdom. It teaches you that to be good, you must disappear. That to help others, you must erase yourself. And slowly, without realizing it, you become addicted, not to love, but to pain disguised as purpose. But real purpose is not self-destruction. Real purpose includes you. And as Brown says, when we trade authenticity for safety, we end up living disconnected from our own hearts. Goodness that demands your silence, goodness that rewards your exhaustion, goodness that punishes your joy, is not goodness. It's an emotional prison decorated with gold-plated chains. And if you've been trapped in that prison, it's time to step out. Not to stop being good, but to start being good in a way that includes your soul. Nietzsche said something most people misunderstood, that all life is driven by a will to power. And no, he wasn't talking about power over others, not domination, control, or tyranny. He meant something deeper. The power to express yourself fully, the power to become who you really are, before the world told you who to be. It's like a seed pushing through the soil towards sunlight. It doesn't need permission, it doesn't ask if it's too much. It grows because growth is its nature. But what happens when you grow up in a family, a culture, or a community that tells you, don't shine too bright, don't dream too big, don't want too much? It's selfish. Gabor says this is how we lose our authenticity. Not because we want to, but because we fear rejection. And so, we clip our wings to be accepted. We mute our brilliance to make others comfortable. We learn that to be good means to hide the most sacred parts of who we are. I once knew a woman, brilliant, compassionate, radiant, who spent 40 years apologizing for her intelligence. She dimmed herself in every conversation. She downplayed her ideas. She let others take credit to avoid making anyone feel small. And she called it kindness. But it wasn't kindness. It was fear. It was the inherited belief that goodness requires invisibility. Atomic Habits author James Clear reminds us that identity is not found in grand declarations, but in small, consistent actions. The way you speak your truth when it's inconvenient. The way you say no when it would be easier to say yes. The way you show up, even when no one's watching. That's your will to power, not arrogance, not defiance, but the quiet revolution of being fully alive. The courage to be disliked puts it this way. Freedom is being disliked by others without giving up your values. And that's what scares people. Because when you grow without guilt, when you shine without shame, you remind others of what they gave up. So they'll call you selfish. They'll call you dangerous, but you'll know the truth. You're not dangerous because you want power over people. You're dangerous because you've stopped waiting for their permission to be whole. Not all goodness is pure. Some of it hides a bitter aftertaste. You've felt it, haven't you? That subtle guilt trip after someone helps you. That favor you never asked for. Now used as leverage, not love. This is resentful goodness. Virtue fueled by bitterness. Robert Greene warns about it. When people cannot express their frustrations, they turn to moral righteousness and use it to punish. but reminds you of it every chance they get. You see it in the person who criticizes anyone who's successful, in the colleague who acts sweet but collects your every mistake. It's often a mask for buried rage, in the family member who sacrifices for your good, in the drama of the gifted child, aware, eager to please, who learned early that being themselves wasn't safe. Explains this with painful clarity. What looks like virtue, and behind that rage is usually one thing. They don't even know they're angry. A life unlived. Alice Miller, their anger, their ambition, all to stay loved. Many so-called good people were once gifted children, sensitive, so they became what others needed. They repressed their joy, and years later, until someone dares to live freely. Someone who doesn't apologize for their success. Someone who doesn't hide their happiness. Someone who says no without guilt. The resentment surfaces and suddenly, they're full of themselves. They've changed, their pain would feel justified. They think they're better than us. But what's really being said is, always overextending, always quietly resenting. It's not too late to help without needing to be praised. That's when your goodness becomes clean again. They're doing what I never had the courage to do. Dostoevsky wrote about these characters, the ones who hide their misery behind virtue, but deep inside, they want to see the happy fall. They act like saints. Their sacrifice would mean something. Because then, but here's the danger. This kind of goodness is radioactive. It helps in order to own, it sacrifices in order to shame. It's not kindness, it's control wearing a smile. And if you've ever found yourself stuck in that role, always giving resentment is a sign. Not that you're bad, but that your boundaries were violated. Often by yourself, real goodness doesn't fester. And when you learn to say no with peace, to give without obligation, that's when your love is no longer a cage, but a gift. There's a certain kind of loneliness that only people with integrity know. It's not about being physically alone. It's about being surrounded by people and still feeling like an outsider. Because you won't laugh at cruel jokes. Because you won't pretend not to notice injustice. Because you won't betray yourself to belong. And so, you sit in rooms where you're barely understood. You work in places where honesty is inconvenient. You speak truths that make people uncomfortable and they call you rigid. Boring to serious, they say, you need to relax. But what they mean is, we want you to betray your soul like we did. Brown says, you can choose courage, or you can choose comfort, but you cannot choose both. And integrity will never offer you comfort first. It will give you sleepless nights, but a clear conscience. Viktor Frankl, who survived the unimaginable horrors of the Holocaust, wrote, those who have a why to live can bear almost anyhow. And sometimes, your why is this: I will not be a liar, not even a silent one, and becomes a rite of passage. That's when loneliness stops being weakness. It's the path of those who refuse to laugh along, who won't befriend corruption just to avoid conflict, who won't gossip to gain favor. You become like the sober person at a party full of drunks, seeing things no one else seems to see. But there's a strange gift in this exile. It forces you to face yourself, to learn the sound of your own thoughts, to stop needing applause to know what's right. The courage to be disliked puts it this way: you are not living to satisfy the expectations of others. And once you deeply accept that, you stop shrinking to fit rooms that were never built for you. You stop apologizing for being clear. You stop begging to belong where you are meant to stand apart. Because integrity doesn't need a crowd. It needs only one thing: your quiet loyalty to what you know is true. That's the kind of person who may feel alone, but never hollow. Because even in solitude, they are whole. In today's world, goodness has become a performance. We don't just try to be good, we try to look good. On social media, in the workplace, in public conversations where the cameras are always rolling, even if they read just in someone's pocket. We've entered what Mark Manson calls a culture of outrage and virtue signaling, where being morally loud is often more important than being morally real. You see it every day. The person who rushes to help but later keeps score. The online post dripping with empathy, written to go viral, not to heal. The apology that's rehearsed for optics, not growth. It's goodness rebranded as social currency. Robert Greene writes about this shift. Public morality is often the clever disguise of private ambition, and you start to notice that the ones who cry on cue often have knives behind their backs, that the sweetest words sometimes carry the most strategic poison, and that the people who are always concerned are often the ones pulling strings behind the scenes. Real virtue doesn't post itself. Real kindness doesn't need real empathy doesn't announce its arrival like a press release. But here's the tragedy. Even when you act from the heart, people start to question you. When you give without expectation, they ask, what's your angle? When you speak kindly without agenda, they wonder, what are you trying to get? The theater of fake goodness has poisoned even the real thing. It is like someone who has been lied to so many times. They can recognize the truth when it finally shows up. Brown says, the opposite of belonging is fitting in. And in today's world, much of our public virtue is just fitting in, playing the role, saying the script, hiding behind the mask of social approval. But true goodness is quieter and harder. It's not designed for applause. It's not aimed at clout. It doesn't convert pain into posts. It heals in silence. It serves without the need to be seen. And maybe that's why so few people choose it, because there's no like button for living with integrity. But if you choose it anyway, you'll find something social media will never give you: peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing your goodness is not for sale. What if true morality isn't something you're taught, but something you build? Not a set of rules passed down without question, but a compass you forge in the fire of your own experience. Nietzsche called this the overman, a person who doesn't blindly obey the values handed to them, but dares to ask, is this truly right? Or did someone just tell me it was? And that's terrifying to most people, because once you start asking that question, you can't go back. The courage to be disliked says it clearly: you must live in freedom, and to do so, you must be willing to be disliked. The moment you stop needing approval, your conscience becomes louder than the crowd. You stop quoting what others told you was true. You start feeling what's true in your bones, not because it's trendy, not because it's safe, but because your soul won't let you do otherwise. I know someone like this, a woman who lives gently, but not passively. She's kind, but not naive. Generous, but impossible to manipulate. She doesn't follow social norms just because that's how it's done. She asks, does this align with what I believe is good? She isn't rebellious for the sake of rebellion. She's clear because she's done the inner work. Robert Greene says the highest form of human maturity is not independence, it's self-possession. You don't just live outside of systems. You live by a truth you've tested. You read not against rules. You're just Dante Bells who rules that violate your soul. And that's what makes you dangerous. Because most people are looking for permission to be themselves. But you've already given it to yourself. And when that happens, something incredible shifts. You stop needing to prove you're good. You simply are. Not because someone's watching, not because you fear punishment, but because it's the most beautiful way to live. Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space, that choice, is where real morality is born. Not in fear, not in shame, but in freedom, and become a free spirit, not out of defiance, but out of truth. That's the moment you stop being a follower, a soul that walks its own path. What happens to people who insist on staying pure in a world that rewards compromise? Nietzsche saw two tragic destinies. The first is the naive lamb, the person who believes in the good of everyone, even when the evidence screams otherwise. They trust too easily, forgive too quickly, offer their heart without armor, again and again, and the world devours them. They're betrayed, exploited, broken, yet they still whisper, maybe next time will be different. Viktor Frankl warned us, when a person can't find meaning in suffering, they'll be destroyed by it. These are the wounded healers, people who preserve their goodness, but lost their sense of context, but no defenses, isolation, and exhaustion. They're like domestic animals left in a jungle. Good intentions. They remain pure, but at a brutal cost. Confusion. Then there's the second fate. The person who guards their purity so fiercely that they withdraw from humanity entirely. They become the monk, the one who's too good to engage with a flawed world. They remain uncorrupted. Gabor, yes, but they also become unrelatable, but you don't feel safe around them. Their goodness becomes sterile. Their light, without wisdom, becomes self-defeating, too distant to warm anyone. And in both fates, the lamb and the saint, the same tragedy unfolds. Goodness, one is consumed by the world, the other escapes it entirely. But neither changes it. That's why Nietzsche proposed a third path, a rare, difficult road, not of blind goodness, not of spiritual detachment, but of conscious strength, a way to stay soft, without being fragile, to walk through darkness, without becoming part of it, to love, without losing your center. It's the path of the silent warrior, and the world has almost no training for that. Is there another way? A way to be good, without being exploited, pure, without being naive, kind, without being used? Nietzsche believed so. He envisioned a rare kind of person, not a saint, not a martyr, not a victim, but a warrior with a soul. A person who walks through this broken world with open eyes, but doesn't let the dirt stain their spirit. Someone who knows when to speak, and when to stay silent, when to give, and when to walk away, when to turn the other cheek and when to draw the boundary. The Bible describes them this way: be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And that balance is the mark of the silent warrior. They don't fight out of ego. They fight when necessary, not to dominate but to protect what is sacred: truth, integrity, soul. Robert Greene calls it tactical empathy, the ability to understand others without being emotionally hijacked. This person sees manipulation, but doesn't play the game. They walk among wolves, without ever becoming one. And yes, it's a lonely path, because this kind of wisdom can't be taught in a classroom. It's forged in experience, In betrayal, survived. In temptations, resisted. In values, held tight when compromise would have been easier. These are not loud people, they rarely seek credit. But when they speak, the room quiets, because there's weight in their words. Forged in silence, sharpened by pain. They don't seek vengeance. They seek clarity. They don't fear being disliked. They fear being fake. And perhaps what makes them most powerful is that they can hurt, but they choose to heal. They can crush, but they choose to create. They've seen too much darkness to pretend it doesn't exist, but they've also seen too much light to stop believing in goodness. And so they walk, not above the world, not beneath it, but through it, with head high, with heart clean, with a kind of courage that doesn't need applause, because it's already anchored in purpose. There's something deeply moving about a person who chooses to stay good after the world has tried everything to make them bitter. Not blind goodness, not the kind that refuses to see evil, but conscious goodness, the kind that sees it all and still chooses the light. Brown calls this the essence of vulnerability, the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. Anyone can be kind when they're celebrated. The test is when you're betrayed and choose not to become vengeful, when you're used and still find ways to give, when you've been mocked for your softness and still refuse to harden. That's not weakness, that's heroism. The quiet, unsung kind. Viktor Frankl taught this in the most unimaginable circumstances. In a concentration camp where everything was stripped away, and yet he discovered the last of the human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Even when everything else is stolen, your response is yours. Your ability to love after loss, to forgive without forgetting, to keep believing in beauty when all you've seen is betrayal. That's not foolish. That's spiritual rebellion. Alice Miller writes about how many adults who were hurt as children try to protect themselves by becoming hard, stoic, unreachable, guarded. But the rare ones, they keep their tenderness, not because they were never broken, but because they refuse to stay broken. These people are not famous. They're not always noticed, but they're everywhere. They're the ones who raise children with gentleness they never received, who stay honest in corrupt offices, who refuse to gossip in circles full of poison. They keep planting flowers in bombed-out gardens. They keep building bridges over rivers of resentment. They keep showing up, not because it's easy, but because it's right. That's the real quiet hero of our age. Not the loudest, not the most liked, not the most followed, but the person who keeps their soul intact when everything around them falls apart. We often mistake nobility for status, titles, wealth, accolades. But true nobility has nothing to do with position. It's not about how high you stand, it's about how deeply you remain rooted. When the storm comes, Viktor Frankl understood this better than anyone. In the darkest place imaginable, a concentration camp, he watched men give away their last piece of bread, comfort strangers while starving themselves, whisper words of encouragement, even with death breathing down their necks. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That's nobility. Not the kind that's printed on business cards, but the kind carved into the soul. A gardener who waters flowers in a city turned to rubble, not because the flowers will bloom tomorrow, but because they might. A teacher who keeps showing up for students who've stopped showing up for themselves. A man who fixes a broken door in a house that isn't even his, because it's the right thing to do. No cameras, no applause, just quiet, stubborn dignity. In a world that celebrates noise, these are the ones who remain still. In a culture obsessed with performance, these are the ones who stay real. And make no mistake, that kind of quiet nobility terrifies the false, because it can't be bought, it can't be manipulated, it doesn't crave attention, it simply is, rooted in conscience, watered by principle, strengthened by trials. These are the souls who light candles when everyone else is cursing the darkness. They don't argue, they don't posture, they live the example, and their life becomes a silent revolution, a quiet reminder that human dignity still exists, and it does not ask for permission to shine. We were taught that being good means playing it safe, following the rules, saying the right things, smiling even when our soul is cracking. But real goodness isn't polite, it's powerful. It doesn't ask permission, it creates. James Clear says in Atomic Habits, every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you want to become. But what if every action was also a vote for the kind of world you want to live in? That's what creative goodness does. It doesn't just avoid evil, it builds something better in its place. Like a carpenter who fixes what's broken. Not for praise, but because beauty deserves to exist. Like a parent who breaks a cycle of generational pain. Not for applause, but because their child deserves peace. Like an artist who paints not to sell, but because the vision inside them has to be born. That's what real goodness is. Not a performance, a compulsion. The courage to be disliked says it plainly. Real freedom is living as the person you are, not the one others want you to be. When you stop being good for approval and start being good because it feels like breathing, that's when something shifts. You stop feeling exploited when you help, because you're not giving to get, You're giving because it affirms who you are. You stop feeling naive when you trust, because your trust isn't blindness. It's faith in the possibility of goodness. And even if people betray you, your capacity to love remains untouched, because it was never a transaction to begin with. This is the kind of goodness that transforms rooms, without shouting, without proving. It is like music that changes the atmosphere, even when people don't know where it is coming from. It's not trying to save the whole planet. It's creating small sanctuaries of peace, one gesture at a time, one decision at a time, one act of clarity in a foggy world. That's not weakness. That's the quiet revolution. And you don't need a platform for it, just a heart strong enough to keep creating light, even when no one is watching. What if your greatest legacy isn't what you build or what you achieve, but what you refuse to become? In a world that profits off your numbness, that rewards manipulation, that tells you to trade your soul for status, what if your true revolution is simply staying whole? Viktor Frankl called this the last of the human freedoms, the freedom to choose your response. And that includes this choice, to remain kind in a cruel world, to create beauty where others plant chaos, to be honest, even when lying would be easier. The courage to be disliked reminds us that the mission is not to change the whole world. It's to live in such a way that the world cannot change you. And maybe that's why you're here. Not to become famous, not to be universally liked, but to leave a trail of peace behind you, like a soft echo in a noisy world. Your goodness, if it comes from your essence, is your art, not painted on canvas, not etched into stone, but lived. In the way you respond with grace when insulted, in the way you listen without waiting to talk, in the way you carry pain without transferring it to others. These things won't trend, they won't win awards, but they matter. They matter more than you know, because every time you choose truth over convenience, every time you give without needing recognition, every time you stay good when it would be easier to walk away, you're leaving behind something sacred, a fingerprint on history, small but clean. You're telling the universe, you can wound me, but you can't rewrite me. That is your power, not to win every battle, but to walk through them without becoming what you fight. Not to be perfect, but to remain pure where it counts. So no, you may not change the world in one lifetime, but maybe you'll be the reason someone else still believes it's worth trying. And that is no small thing. That is your signature, uncorrupted, unbought, undeniably yours.